You meet someone for the first time. A handshake, a few words, maybe a smile. And before they've said anything that actually matters, you already know how you feel about them. You'd say it's instinct. You'd say you're a good judge of character. But the real answer is far stranger. That decision wasn't made by the version of you that thinks in words. It was made by a part of your brain that doesn't care about resumes or manners or anything you'd call evidence. It made up its mind in about 1/10 of a second, before your conscious mind even caught up. Welcome to the stranger effect, the ancient machinery in your head that decides, almost instantly, whether the person in front of you is a friend or a threat. Let's slow it down. In 2005, a psychologist named Alexander Todorov ran an experiment at Princeton. He showed people a series of unfamiliar faces. Just faces. No names, no context, no backstory. And he gave them only 1/10 of a second to look at each one. 1/10 of a second. Less time than it takes to blink. Then he asked a simple question. How trustworthy does this person seem? The answers came back fast, and they came back consistent. People agreed with each other, again and again, even though they had never met any of these faces before in their lives. Something in their brains was running the same calculation, on the same hardware, producing the same verdict. That's strange enough on its own, but Todorov took it further. He took those same snap judgments, made in 1/10 of a second based on nothing but a static photo, and compared them to something completely unrelated: the outcomes of real political elections. Candidates whose faces were rated as more competent in those split-second glances were more likely to have actually won their races. Think about what that means. People were not voting based on policy positions, debate performance, or political record. A measurable chunk of the outcome was being decided by a face, judged faster than thought, by brains running an evaluation they didn't even know they were running. Todorov went further still. He mapped out the dimensions your brain uses to score an unfamiliar face, and he found there are really only two that matter most: trustworthiness and dominance. Neither one has anything to do with the actual person behind the face. A rounder jaw, a slightly raised brow, features that resemble a baby's face more than an adult's. These alone are enough to nudge your brain towards safe. A heavier brow, a more angular jaw, and the same brain leans toward threat. You are not reading character. You are reading geometry, and your ancient pattern matcher is filling in the rest. So why does your brain do this? Why is it built to judge a complete stranger before you've exchanged a single real sentence? Here's where it gets old. Older than language. Older than cities. Older almost than the idea of civilization as you'd recognize it. For most of human history, and by most, this means somewhere around 200,000 years, you did not live in a world of strangers. You lived in small bands. 20, 50, maybe 150 people at most. You knew almost everyone you'd ever meet because you'd grown up beside them, hunted beside them, buried your dead beside them. A stranger in that world was rare, and rare meant dangerous. An unfamiliar face walking toward your camp wasn't a coworker, a barista, or a date. It was an unknown. It might be carrying food to share, or it might be carrying a weapon, scouting your resources, or bringing disease from another group entirely. You didn't have the luxury of getting to know someone slowly over coffee. You had seconds to decide. Approach or run. Evolution does not reward careful deliberation in moments like that. It rewards speed. A brain that takes 5 minutes to assess a threat is a brain that's already dead. A brain that makes a fast, rough, good enough judgment, friend or foe, safe or dangerous, and acts on it immediately, survives long enough to pass that wiring down. That wiring is still running. In you, right now, every time you meet someone new. It lives largely in a small almond-shaped structure deep in your brain called the amygdala. You've probably heard the word in passing. It usually gets blamed whenever someone explains why you panicked, or why your heart raced before your mind caught up. The amygdala doesn't wait for facts. It scans a face for danger signals, eyebrows, jaw tension, the angle of a mouth, and fires off a verdict before your prefrontal cortex, the slow, careful, thinking part of your brain, even gets the memo. So if it's this old, this automatic, this ancient, does that mean it's accurate? Here's the counterintuitive twist. In 1946, decades before Todorov's face experiments, A psychologist named Solomon Asch ran a different kind of study. He gave people a short list of personality traits describing a stranger. Words like intelligent, skillful, industrious, and somewhere in the list, cold. Then he gave another group the exact same list, but swapped cold for warm. One word, that's all that changed. And it transformed everything. People who read warm imagined a generous, likable person. People who read cold imagined someone calculating and unpleasant, even though every other trait on the list was identical. Asch called this a central trait, a single piece of early information that color codes everything that comes after it. Your snap judgment doesn't just sit quietly in a corner, waiting to be corrected by better information later. It actively reshapes how you interpret everything else that person does. If your gut says trustworthy, you'll read their hesitation as thoughtfulness. If your gut says shifty, that same hesitation becomes evidence they're hiding something. You're not collecting evidence and then forming an opinion. You're forming an opinion and then collecting evidence to match it. That's not how a careful judge of character behaves. That's how a fast, ancient survival system behaves. One optimized for speed in a world of immediate physical threats, not for accuracy in a world of job interviews, dating apps, and video calls with people on the other side of the planet. And it's not just faces. In 1993, researchers Nalini Ambeddy and Robert Rosenthal ran an experiment that should unsettle anyone who trusts their own gut completely. They showed people silent, 10-second video clips of college instructors teaching. No sound, just body language and expression. Then they asked viewers to rate how effective each instructor seemed. 10 seconds, no audio, no syllabus, no exam scores. Those ratings, made by total strangers in less time than it takes to read this sentence, closely matched the actual end-of-semester evaluations given by students who had sat through an entire term with those same instructors. 10 seconds of silent video predicted what took 16 weeks to confirm. That should feel impressive. It should also feel like a warning. Because the same machinery that makes a fast, surprisingly accurate read on a stranger's competence is the exact same machinery that decides, in a tenth of a second, that someone is untrustworthy because of the shape of their jaw, the tone of their resting expression, or features that have nothing to do with their actual character. The system doesn't know the difference between a useful pattern and a harmful one. It just fires. And here's the part that rarely gets said out loud. You are a stranger, too. Every room you walk into, someone else's amygdala is running the exact same tenth of a second calculation on your face, your posture, the angle you hold your shoulders at. That nervous flutter before you meet someone new, the urge to rehearse your handshake or check your expression in a dark phone screen, isn't vanity. It's a much older instinct, quietly aware that you are about to be judged by a system that doesn't wait for evidence. So think about the last time you walked into a room full of people you didn't know, a job interview, a first date, a new classroom, a networking event you almost talked yourself out of attending. You'd say you kept an open mind. You'd say you waited to see how people actually behaved before deciding what you thought of them. But somewhere in the first second, before a single meaningful word was exchanged, an ancient piece of software had already cast its vote. And it had been training for this exact moment for 200,000 years in a world that no longer exists. The interviewer who frowned slightly while reading your resume. The stranger at the party who didn't smile right away. The new coworker whose face just seemed a little off the moment they walked in. You weren't responding to facts about who they are. You were responding to a body that once needed to know, in an instant, whether the figure approaching the fire was bringing food or bringing a weapon. Now look at where you actually live. Not around a fire with 150 familiar faces, but inside a feed of strangers that never stops scrolling. A dating app shows you a face for half a second, and you swipe before you've consciously decided anything. A hiring platform shows a recruiter a headshot before they've read a single line of the resume beneath it. A stranger's 5-star review, attached to a small round profile photo, somehow feels more convincing than one attached to a blank gray silhouette, even though the photo tells you nothing real about whether they are telling the truth. You are not built for this volume of strangers. Your ancestors might meet a genuine outsider once a season, maybe once a year. You meet hundreds before lunch, each one triggering the same tenth of a second machinery that used to decide who got near the fire. The system hasn't gotten any smarter. It's just been handed an absurd number of targets to fire at. You can't switch this system off. It runs beneath your awareness, faster than your patience, older than your politeness. But knowing it's there changes what you do with it. The next time a stranger's face hands you an instant verdict, you can let the verdict register and still refuse to let it write the whole story. You can notice the tenth of a second, and then choose to spend the next 10 minutes or 10 weeks actually finding out who they are. You meet someone for the first time, a handshake, a few words, maybe a smile. And the truth is, you never really met them at all. Not first. Long before you did, a piece of you that's 200,000 years old already had.